How the people are doing? So, the X90 Pro. And yes, yeah, I get it. The X100 is here. It's launched in India, which is a miracle, and it's gonna be here very, very soon. Allegedly. I hope nothing gets delayed in between, but anyways, I still think that this comparison is gonna stand, and the most important takeaway from this is going to be that there are gonna be problems that we'll discuss about the X90. And well, I'm gonna expect the X100 to fix every single one of those. I know all of them will not get fixed, that's just not how things work, but yeah, it's a good starting point. It's a good way to set expectations and then, well, eventually get disappointed in a very nice way. So let's jump in. Alright, so simple daylight main camera image. But there's so much going on behind the scenes because on the Xiaomi 13 Ultra we're using like a vibrant, which as the name indicates, it will give you very vibrant results, as you can see. On the X90 Pro, we are using the regular AI colors mode, which again, very vibrant results. I think it's a little too vibrant on the X90 here. But both phones have their own variety of natural color profiles. So the Zeiss natural colors on the X90, I think by far it gets like the closest to the natural colored tones, so to speak. But the Xiaomi on the other hand, it goes for higher contrast and definitely lower saturation, much more naturalistic tones. But the overall colors, I think they look more realistic on the X90, but with the higher contrast, less exposure on the Xiaomi, I actually prefer the Xiaomi in this case. But of course, Vivo addressed that contrast issue with the Zeiss natural colors with a software update. It was fairly recent, and well, the X90 Pro has something called a textured mode. So this is Zeiss natural colors, and you can see the difference in contrast right here. The Xiaomi looks good, but I think it's a little underexposed. The sky looks a little too dark. But then the X90 Pro with the textured mode, I think it gives you the absolute best of both worlds, at least with the main camera. There's a very good reason I say that. Now, in this case, you can see very high contrast, very punchy look, but it's not oversaturated. It doesn't look overly vibrant. Maybe a little too vibrant in the sky, probably, but it doesn't go overboard. Then that's really nice. Even in a case like this, completely backlit, very difficult shot, you can see that everything in the shadows it's perfectly exposed on the X90. Let's take a look at the leaves. The X90 is jacking up the contrast just enough to make it look really nice and punchy, and it just has a lot of texture and definition. Now this is a close-up, again with the main cameras, and I think this time the Xiaomi actually looks a little bit better. It has slightly lower exposure, slightly lower saturation, and in general it looks more authentic, so to speak. So texture mode on the X90, amazing with the main cameras, but with the ultra-wide things are a little bit dicey. So here's the thing. We can get really nice contrast with Zeiss natural colors alone. You want natural colors and you want good contrast on the X90 with the ultra wide, just use Zeiss natural colors. You can see it looks basically identical, except for the fact that the X90 has way shorter of a field of view as compared to the Xiaomi. But then you use textured mode and you can see the problem. It's way too heavy-handed, and even in a case like this where it isn't exactly challenging in terms of the lighting, yeah, it's too much, way past anything that could be considered just high contrast. Even in a case like this, like the Xiaomi already looks good, and with Zeiss natural colors on the X90, you could get an image that looks essentially like a photocopy of what Xiaomi is giving us over here, and that's great. But on the X90, if you use textured mode, you're gonna get a result that doesn't look quite as nice. Now the issue with textured mode with the ultra wide on the X90, there's a lot of words, but the problem is that it's kind of inconsistent. You can see in this case it's doing a phenomenal job. It looks incredible, perfectly balanced, no problems whatsoever. It's backlit, slightly backlit by the sun, and even then it's doing a great job. In this case, a little bit more backlit and somehow it just completely craps the bed. It does not look good on the X90. The Xiaomi, the consistency on the Xiaomi, that's something that I really want to draw attention towards, because it looks really good and it's consistently giving us really good and balanced results with just like authentic. You don't have to juggle between Zeiss natural colors and the textured mode as you have to on the X90. But of course, the Xiaomi has its weaknesses. You see, the macro mode on the Xiaomi is basically not a macro mode at all, because it just, you cannot get anywhere near as close as you can with many other cameras, the X90 included, and you can see it looks exceptional on the X90. Now, again, heavy-handed with the contrast, because this is again using the ultra-wide camera, so the same problem applies. Now then for zoom, so this is 2x, and the Xiaomi does have sensor crop, and the details are pretty much the same as opposed to the X90, which has very good optical zoom already, but the sensor crop on the Xiaomi is more than good enough to keep up, especially when you have good daylight like this. Then for 3.2x, this is where Xiaomi's telephoto kicks in, and of course it's going to be much better than the X90, because the X90 doesn't really have any telephoto zoom apart from the 2x. And well, it's the exact same story with the 5x. There's no way that 5x high quality telephoto that we get on the Xiaomi, it's not gonna exactly have any competition from the X90 in this case. Now then, high resolution. Now the Xiaomi 13 Ultra gives you high res, that to 50 megapixel high res with every single rear camera. It's very impressive, and I really like just how coherent it is. It just gives you very high quality sensors for every single camera, and that does work out quite well. And this is with the main camera, and when we punch in, you can see that even though the resolution is pretty much the same, you get a little bit more detail and a little bit less sharpening on the Xiaomi 13 Ultra. Granted, 500% zoom, but still, the entire point of high resolution is that you can get images that look as good as the Xiaomi, and not quite as processed as the X90. Now the ultra-wide camera, see, the X90 does not have high resolution. It's a basic 12 megapixel sensor, and it's not particularly high quality, especially when you compare against the Xiaomi or even the previous generation X80 Pro. I think the ultra-wide on the X90 Pro is a fair weakness, and there's a very good reason to say it. Now in daylight, of course, the X90's processing is more than good enough to keep up even with high res on the Xiaomi. I mean, yes, it looks less sharp and way less processed on the Xiaomi, but yeah, I think for 12 pixels this is a good amount of detail we're getting on the X90, but it's only at night time when things really start to falter on the X90's ultra-wide. Now the 2x on the X90, unlike the ultra-wide camera, has 51 pixel high res, which I don't really know why that's the case. I mean, the ultra-wide should have high resolution. It needs a really good sensor, but that's not always the case with the 2x telephone. Anyways, regardless, when we punch in, of course, compared to Xiaomi sensor crop, it is gonna have more detail, right? I sincerely doubt anyone expected anything different in this case. Now at 3.2x, well, of course, the Xiaomi is gonna take a lead in this case because it has high resolution. The X90, it lacks any further zoom apart from the 2x. But when we punched in, you know, it's kind of impressive how good the X90 looks in this case. It's not as good as the Xiaomi, but it's way closer than I thought it would be. Now for 5x, again 50 megapixels on the Xiaomi 13 Ultra. Like, I'm telling you, the high res on the Xiaomi is exceptional. There's very few phones that give this much high res, and that too proper high quality high res on every single rear camera. That's quite something. I mean, I understand the X90 isn't exactly gonna put up a whole lot of competition against the Xiaomi in this case, but it's still quite impressive on the Xiaomi just how much versatility we have. Now then, moving on to selfies, see, here Xiaomi decided to desaturate a little. It's overall basically as good as the X90, but it doesn't really have the saturation that's needed in the skin tones and even in some of the plants in the background. As for a backlit selfie, and yeah, this is exactly where the Xiaomi starts to falter quite a bit. Like, the front camera, in my experience, has the maximum amount of issues when it comes to the Xiaomi. Like, that's the one major weakness. The X90 in comparison, which again doesn't exactly have the absolute best selfie camera, is still doing significantly better than the Xiaomi here. And even in this like very evenly lit portrait selfie, you can tell that there's some problems on the Xiaomi. First and foremost, it's just way too faded, and somehow for some odd reason the sky is completely blown out in the background, which I don't really know why that's happening. And the X90 is doing a phenomenal job. I mean, it's leaps and bounds ahead of the Xiaomi in this case. And even with a backlit selfie, you can see that the X90's dynamic range is better, its contrast is better, its skin tones are better. The only problem I have on the X90 is that it's just got way too much lens flaring, which I'm not really sure why that's the case. The Xiaomi is doing that one thing slightly better, that is controlling the lens flare. Now for night selfies, I would highly recommend that you don't use it on either of these phones because, man, it looks so weird on both. Like, it's just, damn. The X90 in particular, it deformed my face. The smoothing is so ridiculous in that. And on the Xiaomi, we basically have no brightness. So let's move on to portraits, because that's where actually we get some small differences. You see, in this case, the Xiaomi is slightly blowing out the highlights. I'll tell you this much, the X90 is doing an exceptional job in this case. The fact that it's controlling all those highlights because the sun was bright as all hell combined. It's a miracle that I could even keep my eyes open for this one, but regardless, I did. And yeah, the X90 is definitely doing a much better job here. As for this 2x portrait, and yes, I know the framing isn't quite perfect, but regardless, I think there's some problems happening with the Xiaomi's highlights. Like in the previous shot, it overexposed them, and in this case, for some reason, there's overexposed bokeh in the background, which makes no sense because the sunlight is in front of me and not behind me, and it's just not how it's supposed to look, and it looks very awkward on the Xiaomi in this case. And this right here is 3.2x on the Xiaomi, and yeah, it's very inconsistent. You can see this time it's not overexposed in the highlights, which is a milestone, but it is completely crushing a lot of the shadows, and the contrast is a little too high. The X90, as you can tell at this point, it is very consistent in the way it can handle portraits. It's probably like just as good, in a different manner, just as good as the iPhone, and the Xiaomi is just quite a bit behind. As I said, the selfies and the portraits as well. These are the two major weaknesses on the Xiaomi 13 Ultra. If you don't mind that, then the Xiaomi is just an absolute powerhouse of a camera, but yeah, these two are really dragging it down. Now in this backlit portrait, somehow, this is 1x, and somehow the Xiaomi is doing a near exceptional job. I do think the X90 is maybe pulling ahead a little because it's handling the highlights in the sky a little bit better, but it also has a bit of lens flaring, so I think it's more or less a tie. But I'm just surprised, the Xiaomi can produce portraits like these, then why the hell were the previous 3 portraits absolute garbage? And even in this case, I'm using the telephoto cameras on both, and you can tell both look nice, but the contrast on the X90 is significantly better. It's very well balanced and very consistent, and that's precisely why I think that the X90 is probably one of the best portrait cameras that you can buy. Now, night portraits, it doesn't exactly work on the Xiaomi 13 Ultra, as you can tell. I mean, it's noise free to a fair extent, but there's no brightness. The X90, I think it overexposes the image a lot of times. In this case as well, I think it could have gone a little bit dark, a little bit high contrast, but I do think that overall the detail levels and everything else is just so much better on the X90 that it doesn't really stand much of a chance. The Xiaomi, that is. Now then, for night mode, well, you see, the X90's night mode is good. It is very, very good. Do you want to just make that very clear? It gives you exceptional levels of detail, just like the Xiaomi. It gives you very noise-free results, just like the Xiaomi, at least with the main camera. But the look of nighttime, you lose it almost entirely on the X90. I mean, just take a look at the sky. Does that look like a night sky to you? It doesn't look like it to me. The Xiaomi, on the other hand, we're using Leica Vibrant in this case, and it is giving us a very vibrant result. But then we go to Leica Authentic, and this is where it can get really, really realistic. And for good reason, Xiaomi really just put a lot of work into it, and it looks proper right now, even with like daylight results, night mode results. It's very cohesive and it works really well. Now in this case, I was kind of surprised by the X90 because it is giving us a really beautiful night sky. I don't know how that happens because this has never happened before. It's always done what it did in the previous shot, giving us really bright blue skies. While in this case, somehow it's doing just as good a job as Xiaomi 13 Ultra, and it's interesting to see. Now the ultra-wide night mode. See, this is where I already mentioned there's a problem. The X90's ultra-wide camera, I don't know if it's a problem with the sensor or not, or maybe it's something to do with the processing, maybe both, but it just doesn't have the quality to keep up with something like the Xiaomi 13 Ultra. Now the Xiaomi does have a lot of contrast, which I do like. It looks very realistic, basically how it looked to my eyes, like the darkness in front, it looks proper. The X90 is exposing that a lot, which some might prefer, but the detail level is it's mush. Most of the leaves are just undecipherable. The sky is a little too bright and a little too blue again. And this one, I think it speaks for itself. The level of artifacting and the lack of proper detail, especially in the tree up front, even though there's some light falling on the tree, I think it really goes to show that in comparison, the Xiaomi is just so much better, so far ahead. I would say the Xiaomi's night mode, especially with Leica Authentic, if you want realistic night mode, I think it's basically as good as the iPhone. And I know I've been bringing up the iPhone a lot because the iPhone has really good night mode and it has really good portraits and selfies, so that's kind of why I've been talking about it. Now this ultra-wide shot is a difficult one because there's very little light in the foreground and a whole load of backlight back there, and it's very obvious the X90 is not really able to keep up. Now of course we also get a lot of zoom options on the Xiaomi 13 Ultra, even at night, and this is the main camera shot, and I think the X90 is actually doing a slightly better job with handling some of the highlights. That's one of the key areas where the X90 is really good. with the main camera and the main camera alone. Moving on to 2x, of course, this is sensor crop on the Xiaomi 13 Ultra, and I don't think it uses sensor crop all that well because it's nighttime. You can't really get proper light gathering capacity when you're using sensor crop. And also, I do want to point out that the X90 is once again handling those highlights perfectly. I mean, just look at it. You can make out the specific lights in the background, while the Xiaomi is kind of blowing them out a little bit more. Now 3.2x, of course, the Xiaomi is going to pull ahead. I mean, it has a very high quality sensor, we've already established that, and you can tell it looks exceptional. The X90, of course, at this point is starting to show some artifacting and noise. At 5x, of course, the Xiaomi is performing exceptionally well. I mean, this looks very, very good, especially considering that there is a bit of a backlight situation happening at night. With 5x, this is really some good stuff over here. The X90 obviously can't exactly keep up, it doesn't have the opticals in. And so that brings us to the end of this comparison. And as I said, the entire point of this was to see exactly where the X90 falters so that we can set expectations for the X100. Now, I don't know how many people are actually going to watch this video, but regardless, I do think that there are some key areas where the X90 can definitely improve upon. The ultra-wide textured color profile that we have, it needs to, be a little bit more subtle in its approach. That's not the biggest deal in the world, most people might not even end up using it, but the real issue is in the ultra wide at night. That's where it really needs to have some kind of upgrade, whether it's the processing that gets jacked up or if it's the hardware that needs to be improved. Whatever the case, I do hope they do it. The Xiaomi, it's a fantastic camera for landscapes and night mode and so on and so forth, but the human subjects is of course where it falters. I don't really think I have to say anything more about that. So anyways, I'll be seeing you guys soon enough with many more camera comparisons to come, especially with the X100 Pro. Cheers!